The Architect of Echoes. Elias Vance built futures from glass and steel, but his own had become a sterile blueprint. He was the architect of the city's skyline, yet standing in his penthouse, staring at the plans for the Nexus Tower, his supposed masterpiece, he felt only a hollow echo. The city sprawled below, a monument to his vision, but the vision itself had faded. He was a cartographer with no new worlds left to chart, a man living in a beautiful, empty museum of his own making. He fled the sterile perfection of his world, wandering the city streets not as its architect, but as a ghost. He sought inspiration in the familiar temples of modernism, but found only polished reflections of his own emptiness. Then he saw it, a defiant anachronism wedged between two of his own towers, a small stone building with a carved cornice that read, "The Athenaeum of Forgotten Folios." It was a whisper of history in a city that only screamed of the future. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper, beeswax, and something else, something warm and alive. It was a world of organized chaos, of towering shelves that defied geometry, and at the center of it was Clara Reed. She was bent over a massive, hand-drawn map, her brow furrowed in concentration, a fine-tipped pen in her hand. Her hair was a cascade of messy curls, and the soft light from a low-hanging lamp caught the delicate curve of her neck. "What is it?" Elias asked, his voice feeling too loud in the quiet space. Clara looked up, and her eyes, the color of warm amber, met his. For a moment, the world stopped. "It's a map of the city," she said, her voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through him. "But not the one you know. This one charts memories, the heart of the city, not just its bones." Her passion was a palpable force, a warmth he hadn't realized he was freezing without. He came back the next day, and the next. He became her unlikely assistant, his hands, so used to the cold precision of steel, learning the delicate art of handling fragile paper. He found excuses to stand closer, to let their fingers brush as they unrolled a scroll. Each accidental touch was a jolt, a spark of static electricity that promised a storm. One night, with rain lashing against the stained glass windows, the silence between them was no longer comfortable, but charged. It was filled with unspoken questions, with the scent of rain and old books and the subtle perfume that clung to her skin. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why spend your life looking backward?" "I'm not looking backward," she countered, her amber eyes holding his. "I'm looking for the foundation. You can't build a future if you don't understand the past, Elias. A building without a soul is just a cage, no matter how beautiful." Her words hit him harder than any structural stress test. He wasn't just creatively empty, he was soulless. And she saw it. He stood up, the tension pulling taut between them. He walked around the table until he was standing behind her. He could feel the heat radiating from her body. He slowly reached out, not to touch a book, but to gently graze the back of her neck with his fingertips. She shivered, her head tilting back slightly, an invitation. He leaned down, his lips finding hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, hungry collision, a release of weeks of pent-up longing. It tasted of dust and rain and want. Her hands came up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer, answering his hunger with her own. The world of maps and memories dissolved into the simple, undeniable reality of her mouth on his. They broke apart, breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. "My apartment," he breathed, the words a raw plea. She didn't hesitate, just nodded, her eyes dark with a desire that mirrored his own. The intellectual connection had been the kindling, but this was the inferno. The ride to his penthouse was a silent torment. In the chrome and glass elevator, the city lights a dizzying blur below, he pressed her against the wall. The kiss was even more urgent this time, a frantic claiming before they reached the clinical solitude of his home. Her hands roamed his back, pulling his shirt from his trousers, her touch branding him. The moment the apartment door slid shut, he was on her. He backed her against the cold, smooth wall, his mouth devouring hers while his hands explored the curves of her body. Her dress felt like an unnecessary barrier, a final piece of formality he needed to destroy. He found the zipper, pulling it down with a sharp, satisfying rasp. The dress pulled at her feet, leaving her in a simple slip that clung to her body. The cool air of the apartment raised goosebumps on her skin. "You are so beautiful," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. He knelt before her, his lips tracing a fiery path down her stomach, his hands sliding up her thighs. She gasped, her fingers tangling in his hair as his mouth found her. The world dissolved into pure sensation. The cold wall at her back, the heat of his mouth, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bearing silent witness. It was a dizzying, overwhelming pleasure that made her entire body tremble. He rose, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to the bedroom. The room was as stark as the rest of the apartment, dominated by a large bed and a window that looked out onto the entire glittering city. He laid her down gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want to see you," he said, "all of you." He undressed her slowly, reverently, his gaze an intoxicating caress. Then she returned the favor, her fingers unbuttoning his shirt, her touch both hesitant and bold. She explored the hard planes of his chest, the body of the man who built cages, realizing it was a cage of its own, and she was the one who had finally found the key. He came into her with a slowness that was exquisite torture, their bodies fitting together as if they were two halves of a forgotten blueprint. He moved with a steady, deep rhythm, watching her face, his own expression, a mixture of intense pleasure and profound relief, as if he'd been starving and she was a feast. She wrapped her legs around him, meeting his thrusts, urging him on. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon as their rhythm quickened. It wasn't just sex, it was a conversation, a fusion. He was the rigid steel, and she was the organic, vibrant life that grew around it, transforming it into something new, something alive. Her climax washed over her in a tidal wave, her cry swallowed by his kiss. His own release followed a moment later, a guttural groan of surrender. He collapsed onto her, their hearts pounding in unison, their bodies slick with sweat. The silence that followed was not empty, but full, brimming with the aftermath of their storm. They lay for hours, talking. He spoke of his emptiness, the pressure to create something perfect. She spoke of the stories she found in the margins of history, the souls of places. In the cool darkness of his sterile penthouse, they built a new foundation, one made of vulnerability and trust. In the early hours of the morning, he got up. He didn't go to his hologram table. He pulled out a piece of paper and a charcoal pencil. With Clara watching from the bed, a sheet wrapped around her, he began to draw. The lines were not straight or perfect. They were fluid, passionate, and alive. He drew the new Nexus Tower. It was still tall, still bold, but it was no longer an intruder. It curved and flowed, with hanging gardens that traced the path of a forgotten river. Its base wasn't a cold marble lobby, but a bustling, open-air market. It was a building that remembered. Clara got out of bed, wrapping the sheet around herself, and came to stand behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her chin on his shoulder to look at the drawing. "There it is," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The heart." He turned his head and kissed her, the faint taste of charcoal and a new beginning on his lips. The Nexus Tower became the soul of the city. It was a marvel not of engineering, but of empathy. People flocked to its gardens and its market, feeling a connection to the place they couldn't explain. It was more than a building. It was a story, a dialogue between the past and the future. In the heart of the bustling plaza, Elias stood with Clara, his hand in hers. They looked up at the building that was a monument to their passion, a fusion of his vision and her soul. He was no longer just the architect of the skyline. He was a storyteller, and with her, he had finally found a story worth telling. He leaned in and kissed her, a promise of many more futures to build together.